My name is Lena Lowell. I am 32 years old, and last Sunday, inside the Fellowship Hall of St. Matthew's Church in Lancaster County, my husband's phone lit up with a message that changed the way everyone in that room looked at me. It was after the fundraiser lunch. The folding tables were still covered with white plastic cloths. Coffee had gone cold in silver urns, and someone's apple pie had left cinnamon crumbs across the end of the dessert table. I was wiping down a chair when Drew set his phone beside the lemonade pitcher and walked toward the kitchen doors to help carry out trash bags. The screen buzzed once. Not loud, not dramatic. Just one soft vibration under the scrape of metal chairs and women laughing near the bulletin board. Then the words appeared. Last night meant everything to me. For a second, I did not move. My hand stayed wrapped around the damp cloth. My chest did not rise. It was as if my body understood the sentence before my mind allowed it in. Then Sylvia saw it. My mother-in-law was standing close enough to read every word. But she did not look at Drew. She did not call his name. She did not ask why another woman was sending my husband a message like that on a Sunday afternoon. She turned to me. Her face changed first. Not shock, not confusion. Something colder, something prepared. "Lena," she said, loud enough for the women by the coffee urn to hear. "How desperate are you to frame my son?" The room went quiet in pieces. A laugh stopped. A chair leg dragged once against the floor. Drew came back through the kitchen doors and froze. I looked at him, waiting for one sentence. "Tell her, that is your phone." But he only said, "Mom, not here." That was when I knew the message was not the beginning. It was the first thing I had been allowed to see. Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet you're watching this video right now while lying down with your legs crossed, right? If that's true, type 3. If not, type 4. Let's see whether I got it right. Alright, enough talking. Let's begin the story. I should have understood Sylvia Lowell the first night I met her. It was 8 years earlier, a Saturday in late September, the kind of Pennsylvania evening that smelled like wet leaves and wood smoke before the first real cold settled in. Drew was nervous in the car. He kept tapping 2 fingers against the steering wheel and telling me his mother could be a little formal. Formal. That was the word he chose. Sylvia opened the front door before we reached the porch. She wore a pale blue cardigan, pearl earrings, and the expression of a woman who had already decided where everyone belonged before they stepped inside her house. She did not hug me. She took my hand in both of hers and held it 1 second too long. "Lena," she said, looking first at my shoes, then at my face. "Drew has told us so much." Behind her, Arthur Lowell sat in a recliner near the fireplace with a folded newspaper resting on his lap. He smiled at me like he was grateful for any warmth that entered that room. Dinner was pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and rolls in a cloth-lined basket. Everything looked careful. The napkins matched the placemats. The water glasses were already filled. Even the butter had been sliced into perfect squares, as if disorder itself had never been allowed in that house. For the first 15 minutes, Sylvia was pleasant enough. She asked about my work, and I told her I worked in discharge coordination at a rehabilitation center. I helped patients go home after strokes, surgeries, falls, things like that. Arthur leaned forward when I talked. He asked what people usually needed after a hip replacement. "A raised toilet seat," I said. "Grab bars, sometimes a shower chair. Mostly they need someone to explain everything twice, because hospitals give people paperwork when they're too scared to read it." Arthur nodded slowly. "That sounds useful." Sylvia dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin. "Useful," she repeated, as if she were testing the weight of the word. "But is it a career, dear? Or just something kind-hearted girls do before they settle down?" Drew gave a small laugh. The kind people use when they want a sharp thing to sound harmless. I smiled because I was 24 and in love, and I still believed discomfort was just the price of being accepted. Then Sylvia started asking other questions. Where had I grown up? Did my mother still rent? Had my father left anything when he died? How much student debt did I carry? Did my job offer retirement benefits? Did I expect to keep working nights after marriage? When I mentioned occasional night rotations, Sylvia's fork paused halfway to her plate. It was the first time all evening she looked genuinely interested. Nights are hard on a marriage, she said softly. People get lonely in empty houses. None of her questions sounded cruel by themselves. That was Sylvia's gift. She could cut a person into pieces and make each cut sound like concern. When dessert came, Arthur asked if I liked apple cake. Sylvia answered before I could. Lena seems practical, she said. Practical girls usually don't fuss about dessert. I remember Drew squeezing my knee under the table. I thought it meant, I know she is being difficult. Later, I would understand it meant, please make this easy for me. On the drive home, he said, she liked you. I watched the dark fields pass outside the window. No, I said softly. She measured me. Drew smiled like I was being dramatic. But I was right. Sylvia Lowell did not meet people. She filed them away. And 8 years later, when my husband's phone lit up in a church hall, she already knew exactly which drawer to open. After Drew and I got married, Sylvia did not invade all at once. That would have been easier to name. She came in small, reasonable pieces. A casserole left on the porch the week we moved in. A key she said she needed for emergencies. A Sunday afternoon when she stopped by because she was already in the neighborhood, even though her house was 22 minutes away and Sylvia never drove anywhere without a reason. At first, I thanked her. I was 25, newly married, still folding towels into thirds, because I thought becoming a wife meant making a home no one could criticize. Sylvia found things anyway. She moved the coffee mugs because Drew liked them closer to the stove. She rearranged the medicine cabinet because expired cough syrup reflected poorly on a household. Once, I came home from an evening shift and found every envelope from our insurance company stacked on the dining table, opened neatly with a letter opener. My name was on 2 of them. She had opened them anyway. I thought it might be something for Drew's business, she said. Drew stood at the sink rinsing a glass. He did not turn around. It's fine, Lena, he said. She was just helping. That became the rhythm of our marriage. Sylvia crossed a line. Drew softened the sound of it. I swallowed the rest. And after a while, I started wondering if maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too private, too sensitive, too quick to notice where love ended and control began. The worst of it started after Arthur's stroke. It was mild, the doctors said. Though nothing about Arthur looked mild that morning in the hospital bed, his left hand curled weakly against the sheet, his words slower than his eyes. I understood the discharge packet. I scheduled his physical therapy, argued with insurance about the walker, labeled his pill organizer, and drove him to appointments when Sylvia said she was too overwhelmed to manage the details. One Thursday, after a 10-hour shift, I drove straight to their house to help Arthur practice stepping over the low wooden threshold between the kitchen and sunroom. He was embarrassed by how hard it was. I told him healing was not a straight line. Sylvia watched from the counter, arms folded. When Arthur finally made it across, I smiled before I could stop myself. He smiled back, tired but proud. Sylvia glanced at the clock. Then she looked at my wrinkled scrubs and the loose pieces of hair falling from my clip. Are you always this careless when you're tired? She asked. The room went still. Then she added, softer, almost kindly, I hope you're not bringing that kind of exhaustion into my son's home. I waited for Drew to say something. He was by the refrigerator, scrolling on his phone. He sighed. Lena, don't take it personally. That's just Mom. I drove home that night with my name badge still around my neck. In our kitchen, under the yellow light, I tried to unclip it, but my fingers would not work right away. For years, I thought silence kept peace. I did not understand yet that silence was also a receipt, and Sylvia was saving every one. By the 5th year of our marriage, Sylvia had learned which parts of my life could be made to sound suspicious. My work was the easiest. Rehabilitation does not keep pretty hours. People do not fall in their driveways or come out of surgery according to a church bulletin schedule. Some mornings I left before sunrise with coffee in a travel mug. Some evenings I came home after dark with sanitizer dried into the cracks of my hands. If a family needed instructions no one had taken the time to explain, I stayed. If a patient could not go home safely without a walker, a shower chair, or someone willing to call insurance twice, I stayed. To me, that was work. To Sylvia, it was material. She never accused me directly at first. That was not her style. She preferred questions soft enough to pass as concern. Another evening shift, Lena? Does Drew eat alone most nights? Do the men at that facility always need you after dinner? She said those things while folding napkins after Sunday service, or while pouring coffee into paper cups, or while standing near the bulletin board with Valerie Sloan, close enough to hear every word. If I objected, I looked defensive. If I stayed quiet, the question stayed in the air, like it had earned the right to be there. Drew heard her sometimes. He would give me that tired look later, the one that said I had made the day harder by noticing what happened in it. She worries, he would say. You know how she is. I did know how she was. I just did not yet understand how carefully she was building something. The other thing Sylvia used was the silence in our nursery. We had painted that room pale green during our second year of marriage, back when trying still felt hopeful, and every late period turned me into a woman afraid to breathe too loudly. I bought one small wooden rocking chair at a yard sale and told Drew it was practical, that it could be used anywhere. He let me believe. He believed me. By year 4, the room had become storage. Christmas decorations, extra towels, a treadmill Drew used twice, boxes of company brochures stacked against the wall where I had once imagined a crib. Sylvia never said the word infertility. She was too polished for that. Instead, she spoke around it. At least Lena has her patience, she told a woman from church one afternoon, smiling in that gentle way people use when they want cruelty to look like sympathy. Some women pour themselves into other people's families when their own home feels unfinished. I was standing behind her with a tray of cookies. She knew I was there. The tray felt suddenly heavy in my hands. I remember the smell of sugar and cinnamon, the little paper doilies sliding under my thumb. I remember Drew across the room, laughing with a deacon near the coat rack, not seeing me, or pretending not to. That sentence changed something. Not all at once, not loudly. But after that, every late shift became evidence. Every tired morning became a symptom. Every quiet dinner became proof that I was distant. If I asked Drew where he had been, I was anxious. If I did not ask, I was cold. If I worked late, I was avoiding home. If I came home early, I was hovering. There was no correct way to be innocent once Sylvia had decided guilt suited me better. By the fall of 2024, she had stopped needing full sentences. A lifted eyebrow when I checked my phone. A pause when I said I had to cover an evening rotation. A hand on Drew's arm when I walked into a room, as if he needed steadying from the burden of being married to me. And Drew began using her words. Not exactly. That would have been too easy to catch. But close enough. You've been exhausted lately. You take everything personally. Maybe you need to talk to someone. The first time he said that, we were standing in our kitchen after I came home from a double shift. Rain tapped against the window over the sink. My shoes hurt. My hair smelled faintly of disinfectant and cafeteria coffee. I had spent the last hour helping an 83-year-old man's daughter understand why her father could not climb the stairs alone yet. Drew looked at me like I was the person who needed managing. I'm just worried about you, he said. I wanted to believe that. A part of me still wanted to lay my head against his chest and let worry be love. Then he glanced down the hallway toward the pale green room we no longer talked about. Maybe Mom's right, he said quietly. Maybe work has been easier for you than home. That was the first time his words did not sound borrowed from Sylvia. They sounded signed. Worry does not keep score. Worry does not repeat your mother's doubts in a softer voice. Worry does not turn your work, your empty room, and your tired face into a case file. I did not know then what name Sylvia would give that file. I did not know she would use it in a church hall, in front of women who had eaten at my table and prayed beside me. But she was already writing it, and Drew was already signing underneath. The following Sunday, Sylvia opened that file in front of everyone. After that first accusation, Sylvia stopped saying, "I had framed Drew." She found something cleaner. She turned it into concern. By the next Sunday, she was standing near the coffee urn in the fellowship hall, one hand resting against her pearls, speaking softly to 3 women from church, as if the words had been pulled out of her against her will. "I just think we should pray for a young wife in our family," she said. "She has been under so much pressure lately. Jealousy can make a woman do things she would never normally do." I was in the small kitchen rinsing serving spoons. The water ran warm over my hands. I did not move. Someone murmured, "Oh, Sylvia, I'm so sorry." Another woman asked, "Is Drew all right?" "Not me, Drew." I looked through the pass-through window. Sylvia's face was arranged into sorrow. Drew stood beside her with his coffee untouched, looking down at the floor like a man carrying pain too private to explain. He played the part beautifully. I dried my hands on a paper towel and stepped out. 3 women shifted at once, not enough to be rude, just enough to tell me the room had already changed before I entered it. Valerie Sloan gave me a careful smile, the kind people give when they know a version of your story and are deciding how much pity to show. "Lena," Sylvia said gently. "There you are, sweetheart." Sweetheart. The word asked the room to believe she was being kind. I walked to the coffee urn and picked up an empty cup, just to give my hands something to hold. The cardboard bent slightly under my fingers. Drew came close enough to speak without being overheard. "Don't make this worse," he said. I looked at him. "That was your phone." His jaw tightened. "You reacted strangely." For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. Not because I believed him, because I understood what he was doing. He was not defending the lie yet. He was testing how it sounded between us. By Tuesday, the prayer request had traveled farther than any accusation could have. At work, I felt it before anyone said anything. One receptionist asked if I needed help with my caseload, though she had never asked before. A nurse touched my arm and told me to take care of myself. Then, near the end of my shift, the daughter of a patient stopped me by the discharge desk. "Mrs. Lowell," she said carefully, "your mother-in-law mentioned you might be overwhelmed. Are you sure you're okay to handle Dad's paperwork?" Her father was 81, recovering from a fall that had broken his hip. His walker stood folded beside the chair. His discharge folder was open in my hands, full of medication lists and home safety instructions I had checked twice. I smiled, because that was what women like me learned to do. "I'm sure," I said. "Let's go over the bathroom rails again." I explained every page. I marked the pharmacy number with a yellow tab. I showed her where the physical therapy schedule was printed. My voice stayed even. My hands did not shake. But inside, something went very still. Sylvia had not called me a liar. She had not needed to. She had placed a question mark beside my name, and everyone else had started reading me through it. That evening, Drew brought home soup from the diner on Route 30. He set it on the counter like an offering. "Mom thinks counseling might help," he said. "Not because you did anything wrong, just because you've been under pressure." Pressure, not betrayal. Not his phone. Not the message I had seen with my own eyes. Pressure. I realized then, they were not trying to prove I had sent that message. They were trying to make me look like the kind of woman who could have. The strange thing about being accused of inventing a message is that you start noticing every message after it. Not because I wanted to spy. I had spent years being the woman who respected privacy, who did not check pockets, who did not read over shoulders, who believed a marriage needed trust the way a house needed a foundation. But trust felt different once Drew and Sylvia started using mine as a weapon. 2 nights after he brought home the soup, Drew went upstairs to shower. I stayed in the kitchen, wiping down the same counter twice, because my hands needed a task. Rain tapped softly against the back windows. The house smelled like tomato broth, dish soap, and the faint metallic scent of the old radiator kicking on. His phone was on the island. Face up. It buzzed once. This time the screen did not show a sentence. Just a name. C. Placement. I stared at it longer than I should have. Drew had mentioned that name before. A vendor, he said. Something connected to expansion paperwork for Lowell Home Mobility, a placement service for clients who needed temporary housing during major renovations. It had sounded boring enough to be true. The phone went dark. I did not touch it. Not then. Instead, I stood there listening to the shower run overhead, remembering Sylvia's voice in the fellowship hall, Drew's whisper near the coffee urn, the patient's daughter asking if I was okay to handle paperwork. A clean story was being built around me, and I was the only one acting like the lumber had not already been delivered. The next morning, I found the first splinter. It was beside the shredder in Drew's home office, caught under the wheel of his desk chair, like trash that had tried to hide and failed. A torn strip of paper, no wider than 2 fingers. I almost threw it away. Then I saw the words, Coastal Escrow Deposit. My body went very still. Not dramatic. Not shaking. Just still. I placed the strip on the desk and looked around the office. Leather chair. Framed business license. A photo of Drew shaking hands with a county commissioner at a senior safety event. Everything in that room was arranged to say, responsible man, steady man, family man. The paper said something else. Later that afternoon, while Drew was at work, I opened the laptop we used for household bills. I did not go looking for an affair. I looked for C placement. The search bar filled before I finished typing. Caldwell Coastal Placement. Below it was an email preview from a woman named Tessa Caldwell. Thank you for trusting me with this transition. Transition. I read that word 3 times. Then the side door opened. I shut the laptop too quickly, my heart finally catching up. It was Arthur. He stood in the doorway with one hand on his cane, breathing hard from the porch steps. Lena, he said, voice slow but clear. Did Sylvia ask you about the company checkbook? I did not answer right away. Arthur looked down the hall, as if the walls had started listening too. She said Drew needed a clean start. The radiator clicked behind me. For the first time, the pieces did not look random anymore. C placement, coastal escrow, Tessa Caldwell, clean start. I still did not know what they were building, but I finally knew it had an address. The call came the next morning while I was in the staff break room at the rehabilitation center, standing under a buzzing fluorescent light with a paper cup of coffee I had not taken a single sip from. It was 9:17 a.m. I remember the time because a discharge meeting was supposed to start at 9:30, and I had 12 minutes to become professional again. The number on my screen belonged to our credit union. For one foolish second, I thought maybe it was about the mortgage escrow or a debit card alert. Something ordinary. Something fixable. Mrs. Lowell? The woman asked. This is Karen with Red Rose Community Credit Union. I'm calling to verify your authorization on recent transfers connected to Caldwell Coastal Placement. The room around me went quiet. In a way, rooms do not actually go quiet. The vending machine still hummed. Someone laughed down the hall. A microwave beeped twice, but all of it moved far away. How much? I asked. There was a pause. Paper shifted on her end. The total over the last 4 months is $31,800. I sat down because my knees made the decision before I did. $31,800. Not one mistake. Not one charge. Not one late-night moment Drew could fold into some story about loneliness or confusion. 4 months. Karen kept speaking carefully. There had been several smaller transfers. 2,400, 3,100, 5,700, 8,600, 12,000, all marked as consulting or placement-related expenses. Our system flagged the pattern because both names are on the primary account, she said. We just need to confirm you were aware. I looked at the white table in front of me. Someone had left a ring of spilled coffee near the edge. I set my fingers beside it. Not in it. Beside it, as if that small choice mattered. I was not aware, I said. My voice sounded normal. That frightened me more than if it had broken. Then Karen said there was one more item I might want to review. A transfer from Lowell Home Mobility's operating account. $18,600. Labeled vendor deposit. Authorized by Sylvia Lowell. I asked her to repeat the name. She did. Sylvia Lowell. The same woman who had stood in church asking people to pray for my stability had signed money toward whatever Drew and Tessa Caldwell were building. Karen offered to send confirmation records to the email on file. I gave her a separate address. One Drew did not know existed. My hand moved on its own, writing numbers on a napkin with a pen from my badge reel. 31,800美元 18,600美元 Caldwell Coastal Placement. Sylvia Lowell. When the email arrived, I opened the attachment with my thumb hovering too long over the screen. The transfer memo contained a partial address in Wilmington, North Carolina, and the words residential transition escrow. Transition again. I stared at it until the letters stopped looking like letters. A nurse stepped into the break room and said, "Lena, the Addams family is waiting." I folded the napkin once, then again. I put it in my pocket. Tell them I'll be right there. For the next 40 minutes, I explained fall risks, medication timing, and why Mr. Addams could not climb stairs alone for at least 3 weeks. I pointed to checkboxes. I answered questions. I smiled when his wife thanked me. Inside, I was somewhere else entirely. Betrayal did not feel hot then. It felt cold, organized, numbered, filed. By the time I walked back to my desk, I understood what the message on Drew's phone had really been. Not on accident. A light left on in a house they had already started moving into. I did not call Drew. That was the first smart thing I did. The second was driving to Joyce Kenner's house after work, instead of going home. Joyce lived 2 streets over in a brick ranch, with a flag by the porch, and wind chimes that sounded like old silverware in the November air. She was 66, widowed, retired from managing a credit union branch, and the kind of woman who could look at a bank statement the way other women looked at weather. She opened the door before I knocked twice. "You look like someone just handed you numbers," she said. That was Joyce. No soft entry. No wasted sympathy. Inside, her kitchen smelled like peppermint tea and lemon oil. A radio played low near the windowsill, some local station giving traffic updates no one in that neighborhood needed. She set a mug in front of me and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Tell me in order," she said. So I did. The phone, the message, Sylvia's accusation, Drew's silence, the prayer request, C placement, the torn strip of paper, Arthur at the side door, the credit union call, $31,800, $18,600, Wilmington, Tessa Caldwell. Joyce did not interrupt. She wrote as I spoke, her handwriting sharp and square. When I finished, she tapped the pen twice against the pad. "Men like Drew don't fear tears, honey," she said. "They fear records. And women like Sylvia fear dates, signatures, and minutes." The word record settled over me differently than evidence had. Evidence sounded like crime shows in courtrooms. Records sounded quieter, older, harder to argue with. The kind of thing people filed away because they trusted paper to remember what families tried to forget. Joyce stood and took a small metal box from the pantry shelf. Inside were labeled folders, rubber bands, paper clips, and a stack of blank envelopes. "My late husband used to say a mess becomes a case when you put it in order," she said. "So we're going to put it in order." For the next hour, we made a timeline. Not feelings. Facts. Sunday, November 17th. Message appeared on Drew's phone. Sunday, November 24th. Sylvia turned accusation into prayer request. Tuesday, November 26th. Patient family repeated concern at work. Wednesday, November 27th. Credit union confirmed transfers. Joyce made me write down exact words when I remembered them. She made me separate what I knew from what I suspected. She made me forward the credit union email to an account Drew could not access. Then she slid the legal pad toward me. "Now you need a lawyer who doesn't get excited," she said. "Excited lawyers cost money. Calm lawyers save it." That was how I met Russell Baines. His office was above an old pharmacy downtown, the kind of place with narrow stairs, frosted glass, and carpet that had given up pretending to be new. Russell was 59, silver-haired, and quiet in a way that made people lower their voices without being asked. He read everything I brought him: the napkin with the numbers, the transfer confirmation, the email preview with Tessa Caldwell's name, the notes Joyce had made. He did not sigh, he did not shake his head for effect. He simply turned pages, one by one. Then he looked at me. "Do you want to punish them?" he asked, "or do you want to protect yourself?" I thought of Sylvia saying sweetheart in front of women who already believed her. I thought of Drew looking at me like I was something to be managed. I thought of the pale green room full of boxes. "I want the truth to survive them," I said. Russell nodded once. "Good. Then listen carefully. Do not leave the house. Do not sign anything. Do not confront them with what you know. Back up every document. Photograph every page. Keep your voice low. Let them believe you are still processing." I swallowed. "That feels like lying." "No," he said. "It is refusing to give them the breakdown they already wrote for you." I carried that sentence home like something fragile and sharp. That night, Drew asked why I was quiet. I poured a glass of water. I took one slow sip. "I'm tired," I said. For the first time in weeks, it was not a surrender. It was strategy. For the next 3 days, I became the kind of quiet Drew had always wanted. I went to work. I came home. I answered questions with soft edges. I washed coffee mugs and folded towels and let Sylvia's name pass through the house without reacting to it. If Drew watched me too closely, I gave him tired. Not angry, not suspicious. Just tired enough to fit the version of me they were trying to sell. At night, after he fell asleep, I made copies. I learned the sound of our printer at 12 inches the morning, how it clicked before each page came through, how loud paper could seem in a house where betrayal was sleeping upstairs. I photographed statements under the pantry light because the kitchen bulbs gave too much glare. I emailed files to myself with subject lines so boring no one would open them twice. Utility receipt. Holiday schedule. Insurance update. Then, on Friday, I found the folder. It was not hidden well. That was what hurt. It sat behind a stack of Lowell Home Mobility brochures in the cabinet above Drew's desk, as if he believed I had become too worn down to look above eye level. The label read, Mobility Expansion, 2025. Inside was not expansion. Inside was exit. There were printed emails between Drew and Tessa Caldwell about a condo in Wilmington. Ocean-facing, 2 bedrooms, closing estimate attached. There was a brochure with a photograph of a balcony overlooking gray-blue water, the kind of place people buy when they want a future that looks clean from far away. There were deposit schedules. There was a draft separation agreement. There was a list of household assets divided into columns, his handwriting neat and confident beside each item. House equity, joint savings, business interest, furniture. Even the pale green room was listed as storage conversion. I sat in Drew's leather chair and stared at that line until it blurred. Then I found the note. A scanned page from his yellow legal pad, folded once, tucked behind the condo brochure. "Wait until Lena takes the night rotation. Sylvia can say she has been unstable." I did not cry. My body wanted to. I felt it rise like weather in my chest, hot and sudden. But Russell's voice came back to me. "Do not give them the breakdown they already wrote for you." So I breathed through my nose. Once, twice. Then I took pictures. Every page, every date, every signature. At the bottom of an email thread, Sylvia had written to Tessa, "Once the church understands her pattern, Drew won't look like the one who left." There it was. Not concern, not prayer, not worry. Pattern. That was the word they had chosen for my life. My work, my grief, my empty room, my silence. All arranged into something ugly enough for Drew to walk away clean. That evening, Valerie Sloan called. Her voice sounded careful, almost embarrassed. She said she had been reviewing videos from the fellowship hall for the church page. She had meant to record the dessert table and the volunteer announcements. But Lena, she said, my phone picked up Sylvia talking about you. I closed my eyes. For once, I was not the only one who had heard it. Valerie sent the video at 7:42 that evening. I watched it once in my car, with the doors locked and the engine off. The screen was small, the sound imperfect, but Sylvia's voice came through clearly enough. A young wife. Pressure. Jealousy. Dread. Not me. Never me. The video did not show her face the whole time. Mostly it showed the dessert table, cinnamon rolls under plastic wrap, Valerie's hand adjusting a stack of napkins. But the audio caught what mattered. Sylvia had not been misunderstood. She had not been misquoted. She had taken my name without saying it, and hung it in the room like a warning. I forwarded the file to Russell. His reply came 9 minutes later. This helps. Do nothing yet. The next day, Sylvia called. I let it ring twice before answering because Russell had told me not to seem eager, and Joyce had told me not to seem afraid. Lena, Sylvia said, warm enough to make my skin tighten. I hope you're feeling steadier. There it was. A hook wrapped in velvet. I'm managing, I said. We're hosting the Aging Safely at Home workshop next Thursday at Street Matthews, she continued. Drew is speaking about dignity and trust in family caregiving. Raymond Pike will be there, and several church members. It would be healing for people to see us together. Healing. I looked across my kitchen at the pale green room down the hall, the door half open, boxes visible in the shadow. What exactly do you want me to do? I asked. Just come, she said. Sit with the family, smile if you can. No one expects perfection right now. No one expects perfection right now. She made it sound like mercy. It was a leash. After we hung up, I drove to Russell's office. The late afternoon light sat flat against the courthouse windows downtown. Russell listened while I repeated Sylvia's call from memory. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. This is the room, he said. I knew what he meant. Drew and Sylvia had chosen a public stage where their family name mattered. Lowell Home Mobility would be selling trust to seniors and their adult children, promising safer bathrooms, wider doorways, stair lifts, peace of mind. Sylvia would stand beside Drew as the mother who believed in community. Tessa Caldwell would be there as a residential transition consultant, professional enough to look harmless. Raymond Pike was expected to sign a $76,000 contract for renovations after his hip surgery. And I was supposed to sit quietly in the second row and make them look forgiving. Russell slid a legal envelope across his desk. Not everything, he said. Enough. Inside were copies of the transfer records, the escrow memo, the email showing Tessa Caldwell's name, the note about waiting for my night rotation, and a transcript of Valerie's video. He had also printed a page showing the Wilmington condo listing. $438,000. Ocean view. 2 bedrooms. A future with clean white walls. I touched the corner of the listing, then pulled my hand back. Let them speak first, Russell said. People reveal more when they believe the room belongs to them. On Thursday evening, I dressed carefully, not beautifully, carefully. A navy dress, gray coat, low shoes I could stand in without thinking about my feet. I put the envelope in my purse and drove to Street Matthews under a sky the color of wet slate. The fellowship hall looked brighter than it had any right to. Rows of metal chairs faced a small podium. A banner read, Aging Safely at Home in blue block letters. Brochures sat on every table. Drew stood near the front in a white shirt and navy tie, shaking hands with older couples like he had never betrayed anyone in a kitchen, a bank account, or a marriage bed. Sylvia saw me enter. Her smile widened. Tessa Caldwell stood beside the refreshment table, elegant in a cream blazer, holding a paper cup she had not drunk from. For 1 second, the old Lena wanted to turn around. Then, I felt the envelope against my side, and kept walking. Drew spoke first. Of course he did. He stood behind the podium, with the blue banner behind him, and both hands resting lightly on the wood, looking every bit like the man people trusted to make their parents' homes safer. His voice was warm, practiced. He talked about dignity, about aging in place, about how families had a responsibility to protect the vulnerable before crisis forced their hand. I sat in the second row with my purse on my lap, the envelope pressed against my fingers. Sylvia sat near the aisle, nodding at the right moments. Tessa stood along the side wall with a clipboard, her cream blazer bright under the fluorescent lights. Raymond Pike sat up front, cane hooked over his chair, contract folder resting on his knees. Then Sylvia took the microphone. She smiled at the room like she had baked every cinnamon roll herself and forgiven every sinner in advance. "Trust," she said, "is the foundation of family care. But sometimes, even in good families, stress can make people act from fear." Her eyes found me. A few heads turned. I felt the room tighten around my name before she said anything close to it. Sylvia lifted a folded sheet of paper. "Last week, our family faced a painful situation. A message appeared on my son's phone, a message meant to create suspicion where there should have been grace." Drew lowered his eyes. "Beautifully," Sylvia continued, her voice trembling just enough. "We are choosing compassion. We are choosing counseling. But I ask this community to understand how deeply pressure can affect a young wife who feels left behind." That was when I stood. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor. Not loud, but enough. Sylvia paused. Drew looked at me with warning in his eyes. I walked to the front and held out my hand for the microphone. For a second, Sylvia did not give it to me. Then Raymond Pike shifted in his chair, and she smiled tightly and passed it over. My voice sounded calm when it came out. "Before my mother-in-law talks about trust," I said, "I think everyone here deserves to know what she did with it." No one moved. I opened the envelope. First, the transfer records, $31,800 from our joint account to Caldwell Coastal Placement. Then the vendor deposit, $18,600 from Lowell Home Mobility, authorized by Sylvia Lowell. Then the Wilmington condo listing, $438,000, 2 bedrooms, ocean view. Tessa's face went pale near the wall. I lifted the printed note last. "Wait until Lena takes the night rotation. Sylvia can say she has been unstable." The room made a sound then. Not a gasp exactly. More like everyone inhaling at the same time and forgetting how to let it out. Drew stepped forward. "Lena is overwhelmed right now," he said. I turned to him. "I was accused on Sunday," I said. "Today I brought records." The silence after that felt clean. Not kind. Clean. Then Arthur stood slowly from the back row, one hand braced on his cane. "Sylvia had the company checkbook," he said, voice uneven but clear. "Lena didn't." Raymond Pike closed his contract folder. "I don't let people who hide money rebuild my bathroom," he said. And just like that, the room they had built for my humiliation became the first place their story could no longer stand. For a while, nobody knew what to do with the truth. People shifted in their metal chairs. Someone coughed near the back. Sylvia stood beside the podium with one hand still lifted, as if she could gather the room back into her control by gesture alone. Drew stared at the papers on the table like they had betrayed him personally. Tessa left first. She did not run. Women like Tessa rarely run. She folded her clipboard against her chest, moved toward the side door, and kept her face angled down, as if dignity could be saved by not making eye contact. Valerie watched her go without blocking her. There was no need. The room had already seen enough. Russell handled the rest over the following days. He filed to protect the joint accounts. He sent formal notices about the transfers. He instructed me not to answer Drew's late-night messages, not to respond to Sylvia's apologies that never quite became apologies, and not to explain myself to people who had been comfortable doubting me when it cost them nothing. Raymond Pike canceled his contract before he left the parking lot. By Monday, Street Matthews had asked Sylvia to step down as treasurer while they reviewed the books. She called it humiliation. Arthur called it consequences. That was the first time I heard him say something against her without lowering his voice. Drew moved out 3 days later. He packed badly. Men who expect women to manage endings never know where the extra boxes are. He took his suits, his golf clubs, 2 framed business awards, and a coffee maker he had never cleaned once in 7 years. He did not take the rocking chair from the pale green room. I was grateful for that. Before he left, he stood in the kitchen and said, "I never meant for it to happen this way." I looked at him across the island, where his phone had once lit up, and thought about how many lies fit inside that sentence. "No," I said. "You meant for it to happen quietly." He had no answer for that. When the door closed behind him, the house did not feel peaceful right away. It felt stunned. Like walls need time to understand they are no longer holding someone else's version of your life. I changed the locks. I gave Arthur copies of his medical paperwork and helped him find a different accountant. I told Sylvia any contact would go through Russell until she could say my name without wrapping it in concern. Weeks later, I stood in the kitchen before sunrise, making coffee before an early shift. The house was still. The pale green room waited down the hall, no longer a wound I had to hide from. That message did not destroy my marriage. It only lit up the part of it they had been hiding from me. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that love cannot survive where honesty is treated like a threat. Lena did not lose her marriage because one message appeared on a phone. That message only revealed what had already been happening in silence. The betrayal had been built long before the screen lit up. It was built in every moment Drew chose comfort over courage, every time Sylvia called control concern, every time Lena was asked to make herself smaller so the family could look whole from the outside. And that is something many people understand more deeply than they admit. Sometimes families do not break with shouting. They break in quiet rooms, in polite smiles, in conversations where one person is always expected to forgive faster than others are expected to change. They break when peace becomes more important than truth. They break when someone's pain is treated as an inconvenience instead of a warning. But this story also reminds us of something powerful. Staying calm does not mean you are weak. Walking away from an argument does not mean you lost. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, gather the truth carefully, and let your dignity speak louder than your anger. Lena's strength was not in revenge. It was in restraint. It was in the way she kept working, kept breathing, kept documenting, kept choosing not to become the unstable woman they wanted her to be. She did not need to destroy anyone. She only needed to stop protecting the lies that were destroying her. Real love does not ask you to disappear so someone else can look innocent. Real family does not use concern as a weapon. And real healing begins the moment you stop begging people to see your worth and start living like you already know it. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments what part hit you the hardest. Have you ever had to stay calm while someone tried to rewrite the truth about you? Leave your thoughts below. And if you believe stories like this help people feel less alone, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and come back for the next story.